talk to you a little bit about what we call tester DNA.
You mentioned Windows and web. How about mobile? You mentioned about the Windows and web development or web testing. About mobile testing. Will we study about the mobile testing?
A little bit, yeah. I think the primary class where we deal with mobile is in the client server class. We spend more time on it there than any other place. But there's no doubt that throughout the entire curriculum, you can apply the things we're talking about to mobile. There's no doubt about that. Okay. The key question, one of the key questions there is, it kind of fits to what I offered you earlier as the iceberg graphic, which is, once again, if you're on a mobile platform, to what degree can you understand the distinction between what you're being presented in the user interface versus all the other things that are going on, any of the other interfaces that might be at play. And that's not always so easy to pull apart, especially in mobile devices, but it's certainly all there. And testing for it is just that much more technically difficult. Okay? So the whole concept of tester DNA is about your personality characteristics. What kind of folks do well with this? Okay, what are some of the basic skills that we find over time make for more successful test engineers? And technical curiosity and the ability to think like a tester. These are both subjective. I don't know how to give you a test to see objectively if you fit the criteria, but I understand technical curiosity. You guys have all seen technical curiosity. Every once in a while you're around like a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old kid that's really tuned into something and they're just pulling it apart and they just want to know everything about it. That's technical curiosity. If you're not the kind of person that likes to get into those kinds of things, then you either have to develop your skills, okay, your curiosity skills, or realize that maybe you don't have that kind of DNA. Most people do. Most people who come to this session already have figured out that they're curious that way. Thinking like a tester is all about, how do I break this? Programmers, how do I solve the problem? Test engineers, what did the programmers not think about? Programmers, I just wrote a piece of code and I guarantee you it works great. Test engineers, I'll bet you I could break that piece of code in 20 minutes. It's a mindset, it's a way of thinking. It's a way of never being satisfied. If I run a day's worth of tests, 6 hours worth of tests, and every single test is passing, it works, it works, it works, it works, it works. I'm not going to give up until I find something that breaks. That's thinking like a tester. I'll bet you I could break it if I did this. I'll bet you it doesn't know how to handle that. That's thinking like a tester. That's a mindset that you have to develop. I can't really say that we teach it. I can't really say that I can teach you how to think like a tester. I can help you develop the skill. But I can't take what's in my brain and just give it to you and say, here's how you do it. Everyone has to find how that works for themselves. But you want to develop those skills. Obviously, you want to develop basic knowledge of how software is built. You need to have some form for yourself, a passion for software quality. There's an incredible need to be able to learn quickly. In the tester realm, we are jacks of all trades, so to speak. We know a little bit about a lot, and then we know how to learn more quickly. Developers often know a lot about a little. It's not uncommon for developers to specialize in one very central area. I knew a developer once, and the only thing he did was write installs. He wrote setups. That's what he did. He was world class. Potentially one of like the 10 best guys in the world at writing installers. But that's all he knew. As a test engineer, you can't specialize in being the installer test engineer. You've got to know a little bit about a lot, and then you've got to know how to learn quickly if you need to do the deep dive. Okay? Not everybody has that skill, but most people have that capability and can develop it. I spoke before, you've really got to have strong communication skills. If you don't have them already, you need to develop them. As a matter of fact, adding one more to this, I would generally suggest that if you don't already have it, you need to develop a certain knack for being able to speak truth to power. You ever heard that one before? Speaking truth to power. The big suited boss comes in and says, "Are we ready to ship yet?" And he wants you to say, yeah, he so much wants you to say yes. And you can't be intimidated. As a software test engineer, your role is to be a fair umpire, to be a fair referee, and to tell the truth no matter what. No, I'm really sorry. I'm still finding issues that trouble me. You can ship it if you want, but I'm still finding issues that trouble me, and here are my bug reports that communicate my findings so far, that communicate my concerns. If you are the type of personality that is prone to always saying yes to people who are in charge, you potentially will have problems as a test engineer. Okay? You've got to develop the skill of speaking truth to power. So, I guess the one other thing I would pinpoint off of this slide is the ability to ask really good questions. As test engineers, we rely on asking questions a lot. And for some of us, it's not natural. I know for me, when I first started, it wasn't natural. I wasn't brought up that way. I was brought up, we're asking, oh, no, you know, somebody told you, you don't ask twice, you don't, no. But I had to learn, asking questions is incredibly important as a test engineer. In a little bit, not totally, but in a little bit, every once in a while we know how to turn on our sort of inner 3-year-old. Why? Well, it works this way. Why? Well, why is that like that? Well, why is it? Why? Why? We have to know how to keep going. Now, granted, we need to be tactful. We need to be polite. We need to be respectful. We need to be professional. All those things tie in. But we still have to be incredibly curious and sometimes play devil's advocate. Well, have you thought about the case where if you do it this way, it's going to cause this kind of a problem? Have you thought about that? That's what we need to be able to do. I mentioned already the idea of objective versus subjective. I'll phrase it a little bit differently here. We need the ability to combine our soft skills and our hard skills. I know many programmers, and most of my experience related to this story comes from working over across the way at the software giant. I know many programmers that wouldn't come to work until 11 o'clock in the morning, would get into work, close the door, put a little sticky on it, say email only. They'd work till midnight, hardworking, smart, incredibly good people, but they wouldn't talk to anybody all day. The mythology is, you know, that the lunch was put in under the door, that at the end they just passed the tray out the other side. They'd have no human contact. That is not how we succeed as test engineers. That may work for programmers, and in some ways that may be required for programmers. Because the level of focus, the level of concentration needed for programmers can sometimes get to that degree. But as test engineers, it doesn't work. We need to develop the interpersonal skills combined with the technical skills. In a lot of ways, we become sort of the middle person between the technical team and the non-technical folks. In a lot of cases, we become the translators. We can listen to users who speak like users, and we can translate that into technical language for the developers. We can listen to the developers who speak like developers, and we can translate that back to the users in ways that work for them. We can be that translator. That's very different from programmers. I know many programmers who say, I hate working with users. I hate users. I hate requirements. I know some testers who say the same thing, but they all have gotten past it because they know it's so critical to being a good test engineer. The last piece of the puzzle is this, and we talked about this a little bit on a sidebar. The last piece of the puzzle is this. Everyone in this room already has domain knowledge. You've already got it. I don't know what it's in. We're just meeting here tonight. but I guarantee you everyone has some level of domain knowledge. Maybe you like cooking. Maybe you used to work in a bank. Maybe you used to work in insurance. Maybe you have a hobby of kite flying. Everyone has various things that are interesting to them, that they're passionate about, that have nothing specifically to do with software. We call that your domain knowledge. Domain knowledge in this business is important. Let's say you have experience working in insurance. That makes you a very capable conduit for working with insurance software because you understand the vocabulary of the domain already. Let's say you have a hobby of racing cars. That potentially makes you very much more valuable in testing car racing software, okay, than it does in testing accounting software. Your domain knowledge matters because software is not written for its own sake. Nobody writes software for its own sake unless they're in a classroom setting. Software is written to solve domain problems. We write software to solve finance and banking and insurance problems, manufacturing, medical, entertainment, retail, e-commerce. We write software to solve these domain problems. Your knowledge of domains feeds into your technical knowledge, makes you that much stronger. Personally, I got started in this business because my domain knowledge was in accounting. So where do you think my first software useful work was? Accounting software, business software, finance. I knew the vocabulary of that domain and I could then tie that into the vocabulary of software. My first job at Microsoft was on an income tax software program. It made sense. I was one of like, I don't know, when we first started that team, I think I was one of only 4 people that understood the domain of income tax. I'd never worked at Microsoft before, so I had no clue how Microsoft built software. That was all new to me. But the domain of income tax wasn't new. I knew how the IRS worked. I knew how to read the rules. I knew all of that. You need to find for yourself where your domain strengths are, and in being successful in this business, whenever possible, you want to combine your domain strengths with your technical strengths. That's going to give you a jump start in this business. Have you done that type of thing?
Yes.
Yeah.
I have developed software and something that I knew before.
Exactly. Something you knew before, yeah. Yeah. The whole issue of software quality is a very complex issue. Very few people really spend the time studying it. What is quality software? We know when the software we're working with doesn't have quality. Oh, that's a piece of junk. That's easy. But how do we measure the quality of software, okay? You're going to need to study that. You're going to need to become a student of that. How do you look at software through different lenses, in different perspectives, and say, well, this software is capable of doing this, but it's not very useful in doing that, or it's not very intuitive, or it's not very helpful, or it's not very reliant, whatever the characteristics might be, okay? As I mentioned much earlier, there's objective criteria. A car can reach a top speed of 135 miles. There's subjective. Driving this car feels great. But feel matters. You guys notice how good Apple's been doing the last 6, 7 years? Has Apple been doing good because of objective or subjective reasons? Exactly. Subjective reasons. People love using Apple stuff. It feels good. How do they test that? Interesting question.